People in Hungary have started voting in a parliamentary election that's being closely watched throughout Europe and beyond. My colleague Regina Vaidyanathan is in the capital, Budapest. She gave us the latest details.
Yeah, polls have opened here in Hungary for what's being described as one of the most consequential elections in Europe in years. I mean, this is a relatively small European nation, population of less than 10 million, but it has an outsized influence, you could argue, given the amount of interest that this has generated. This result isn't just being watched closely by people here in Hungary. It's got the eyes of the Kremlin, bureaucrats and EU leaders in Brussels, and, of course, the White House. And earlier in the week, we saw the US Vice President J.D. Vance make a visit here during what's a very busy schedule, of course, as he's tried to secure peace in the conflict with Iran. But he had the time to make a visit here. Now, this is all coming down to two main candidates, the two leaders of the main political parties. Which party can win the largest number of seats at the National Assembly, the Parliament that you can see behind me, to secure a majority and decide who's going to be the next Prime Minister? Well, we've got some pictures of the two main candidates as they voted earlier this morning. So let's talk about Viktor Orbán. He is the leader of the Fidesz party. He's held power here for some 16 years. He's a far-right populist leader, but the opinion polls do suggest that he may be in trouble. Now, he has been known as a thorn in the EU's side. He has a different position, for example, from most EU countries when it comes to funding for Ukraine, and he certainly made that an election issue. His main challenger is the opposition Tisza leader, Péter Magyar. We've got pictures, I think, of him voting this morning as well. He's 45 years old. He used to be a member of the Fidesz party, Viktor Orbán's party. But just 2 years ago, he went on to lead Tisza, and he's now kind of presenting himself as a political outsider, although he was in the past an insider. Well, I'm joined by two guests who know more than a little bit about what's going on here to discuss this in detail. I'm joined by Boris Konocki, a former correspondent with Die Welt, now teaches at the Matthias Corvinus Journalism College, or you teach journalism there. Now that, of course, is where J.D. Vance visited earlier in the week. We'll discuss that in a moment. And also by Ivan Nagy, Hungarian political journalist. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with you, Ivan, because you've gone out to a polling station today. You've already voted. You're going to vote after you've done this. Just tell us about what you saw and what we're hearing already about turnout.
Morning. I voted here in Budapest, which usually doesn't tell you a lot. It's an opposition stronghold, but there were a lot of people, and the stats back it up. By 11 a.m. we have a 38% turnout. That's 8% more than any time at 11 a.m. before. At any general election in Hungary since 1990, that's almost 3 million votes cast. So there is a huge turnout for the moment, and both parties claim that it's beneficial for them to have a large turnout. We'll see which of their statements comes true at the end of the day.
So, Boris, you were part of the welcoming committee for the US Vice President J.D. Vance. As I said in that introduction there, he's got a lot else to deal with right now, but he made the time to come here to Hungary. When he spoke at the events earlier in the week, he did accuse the EU of foreign influence, of interfering in this election. Some might argue that the very fact that J.D. Vance came here is the US trying to influence the outcome. What do you make of that?
Anyone who has any stake in this election is trying to influence it. That does include the US, it does include Russia, but it also includes Ukraine. They have huge stake in the outcome of this election, and they are trying to interfere. And of course, the EU also wants Orbán gone, so they also try their best to influence the election. Question is, will it have any impact on voters' decisions?
Do you think it will?
I'm an old-fashioned Democrat. I do believe that collectively society is intelligent, and they will come to a decision which will be good for Hungary.
Ivan, Ukraine's been a real issue here. You just have to walk around Budapest and you see the posters from Orbán's party with President Zelensky's face splashed on them. That in some way is trying to focus the issue on whether Hungary should have more involvement or less involvement when it comes to Ukraine.
Sure, yeah, it's Viktor Orbán's strategy to try and frame it as as an existential threat for Hungary, and obviously the existential threat being Ukraine and Hungarians and Hungary being dragged into this war. That has been his framing. A lot of us understand this as a way to take attention away from Magyar, who has been very hard to attack. He's been very hard to find weak points on. So for Orbán, it's really beneficial not to frame it against this political maverick and him as a long-standing, long-reigning leader of this country, but as someone who's standing up for this country and is protecting this nation amidst existential threats. So that kind of explains all the Ukraine messaging. It's very important to realize that it has been very similar, his electoral messaging, ever since 2022, the previous general election. So it is a very potent message. It's uncertain how potent it is in the moment still.
Let's talk about this political maverick, Péter Magyar, because many of our viewers will not have heard of him. I was at one of his events on Friday here in Budapest. Admittedly, of course, it's more of a liberal enclave in the country, but huge, huge crowds. The largest concert Hungary's ever seen.
And yeah, and yesterday, on Saturday, I followed his campaign rallies in the east of Hungary. And what was fascinating, obviously we saw his ultimate rally in Debrecen, Hungary's second largest city. Around 10,000 people, maybe even more, showed up, and that was a great sight. But you know, it's a large city, like in many other countries in the West. Large cities tend to lean liberal, tend to lean more opposition. But what I also saw, I went to a small town called Balmazújváros. It's a town of 15,000 people in very much rural Hungary, historically Fidesz stronghold. And nearly 1,000 people showed up on their own on a town square just to listen to Magyar. And that alone should be a very scary message for Orbán. Because in the past, if an opposition politician could gather a couple dozen people, that would have been quite a sight. Now seeing hundreds there is quite a message to Budapest and to Viktor Orbán up in the castle.
Boris, what do you make of that? I was at Orbán's final rally here. There was a sizable crowd, but it wasn't anything like what we saw for Magyar. But do you think people are ruling out another Orbán win too soon?
Yeah, I think it is too soon, and to return to the point my colleague here made earlier, we have a very high turnout. Historically, the highest turnout before that had been in 2018, and just like now, all the pundits the day before were saying, oh, if there's a high turnout, the opposition will win, and during the day itself, they kept saying high turnout, very bad for Fidesz. It turned out to be a huge victory for Fidesz. They had been able to mobilize their voters, but it happened in the smaller villages, in the rural countryside. Now it's the cities, it's in the countryside, the cities. We will have to see who was able to mobilize their extra voters.
Indeed. I mean, we always say this with elections, but we will have to see what happens when the polls close. Boris, Ivan, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts there. So, Sam, a bit of a timeline on all of this. Polls close at 7 o'clock in the evening, local time here. That's 6 o'clock where you are. We then may start to get results even as early as an hour after that. And, of course, who knows which way this will be. But from everything we're hearing, it's likely it's going to be close.